Chapter 31. Taking Chances. After ZO2 broke up, Dave joined an 80s tribute band called Rubik's Cube with a few friends of ours. They were planning a trip to Germany, Syria, and Kosovo to play for the U.S. military on New Year's Eve. Dave wasn't going to be able to make the trip because he was still on tour with TSO. Their singer, Sherry, contacted me about possibly coming and playing the shows with Rubik's. She also asked me if I knew any keyboard players that might want to play the show with us. My friend, Or Matthias, that I played in the TSO backup band with, immediately came to mind. I contacted Or about the shows and he got on board right away. The trip to Germany, Syria, and Kosovo with Rubik's Cube was very interesting to say the least. When we first arrived on the Kosovo NATO base, we were greeted by foreign military guard that none of us recognized. We were then asked to exit the vehicle so they could search it and us before entering the base. Every guard was holding some sort of heavy-duty machine gun. Or and I looked at each other and immediately regretted our decision to join Rubik's Cube on this European adventure. Once on the base, we met with our guide for the week and he escorted us to where we would be sleeping. I'm not sure exactly what I was expecting, but what he showed us was definitely not it. Each of us would be sleeping in what I could only describe as a large metal container. Picture the back of an 18-wheel cargo truck. That is where we would be sleeping for the next few days. Or and I couldn't help but laugh. The rest of the trip went smoothly enough, and it was cool to say we had played for our troops abroad. After returning from Europe, I decided I wanted to try my hand at subbing on a Broadway show. Of course, this was a crazy long shot, and I knew it was next to impossible to break into that world. But those kind of odds never stopped me before. I knew a few players in the musical Rock of Ages, and I arranged to sit and watch one night in February 2013. Just by pure coincidence, Orr contacted me that same day about grabbing a drink. I had some time to kill between teaching drums and going to Rock of Ages, so I met Orr for a quick drink. He was surprised to hear that I was interested in doing a Broadway show. That small, inconsequential drink with Orr would come back to pay big dividends down the road. I truly believe that sending energy out to people and into the world is what creates opportunity. A few months later, Orr called me to see if I would be interested in auditioning for a musical opera that he was going to be playing in called Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. He said they might be looking to add live drums to the music, which currently only had computer tracks at the time. I honestly didn't know what to say. It sounded like it was definitely not up my alley. I asked him when the audition would be. He said, "The audition has to be tomorrow because we open previews tomorrow night." I figured there was no way I was going to go and audition for a show that was opening tomorrow and for which I essentially had to write drum parts for. But I told him to send me the material and the details anyway. Orr sent me 3 songs and the sheet music to look over. When I received them, I was even more sure I was not going to go audition the next day. The sounds were very, very weird with all sorts of electronic tracks playing throughout. The sheet music was even more confusing. I hadn't really read music since leaving high school, and because the songs didn't really have drum parts written to them yet, the sheet music was written more for what the weird tracks were playing. It was very confusing. At the time, I was teaching drums in a few private schools, and after thinking about it for a while, I decided, what do I have to lose? If I got the gig, which I thought was a long shot at best, given the half day I had to prepare, it would be a steady paycheck with me doing 8 shows a week for the whole summer of 2013. I talked it over with Madeline, and she agreed. Why not? I printed out the sheet music and downloaded the 3 songs, which were In My House, The Duel, and Charming. The Duel was the first song I dug into, and it was very discouraging. I really couldn't make heads or tails out of it. Having never seen or heard the whole show, I could not for the life of me figure out what the hell was going on in this song. I'm not even sure it could be called a song. It was more like this weird, semi-spoken, psychedelic, folky club thing. The sheet music didn't help either. It had all of the weird track noises written in it, which made it impossible to decipher. The only reason the sheet music was of any use for this song was so I could follow along the bars to see where I was in the actual song. In My House wasn't much better. It was another weird song with no real backbeat or rhythm to it. Thankfully, the last song, Charming, had a little something I could sink my teeth into. After a few hours of prep, I was as ready as I was going to be. It was a little hard to write anything to these eccentric tracks, especially without knowing what they were looking for. I could only go and be myself and play what I thought might fit into this wacky world. On May 13th, 2013, I went to the Meatpacking District in Manhattan to audition for Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. When I arrived at the address Orr gave me, I saw a large white tent that had been constructed in an abandoned lot across the street from the Standard Hotel. I had no idea what I was walking into. I did know that my life as a touring musician was nearing its end, and that I had to take some chances and make the most out of every opportunity that came my way. I'm confident in myself, my work ethic, my playing, and my personality. I do believe that personality is as important as skill in anything a person does in life. I've met and played with hundreds of musicians over the years, and I would take someone that had a great, fun personality and was a B player over a guy that either had a bad personality or, even worse, no personality and was an A-plus player. When I walked into the tent, it was nothing like I expected. It was almost like the phone booth in the TV show Doctor Who. It was a plain white ordinary tent on the outside, but once inside, I was transported into this magical world. I still had absolutely no idea what the show was about, but after entering into that world, I knew I wanted to be a part of it. The composer Dave Malloy, music supervisor Sonny Palladino, producer Howard Kagan, and Orr, the music director, stood and waited for me to get behind the drum set to begin the audition. As I went to sit behind the kit, I knocked over a 12-foot-tall Napoleon painting that was hanging right above the drums. Luckily, I caught it as it fell, or it would have caused some real major damage. Everyone had a nice laugh, and it broke the tension that was looming over the room. Dave Malloy took control over the audition and began asking me to play certain sections of the songs I was given. As we went through each one, I could see Dave and Sonny whispering back and forth to one another. They didn't really give me any feedback. When it was time to play the song Charming, they brought out the singer Amber Gray. I had written a pretty basic drum part that rhythmically synced in with what the tracks were doing as best as I could. The song seemed to crescendo all the way to the last chorus, so upon entering the last chorus, I played a giant drum fill and then came in at almost full volume. I saw Amber struggling to sing over the volume of the drums. She had never done the song with live drums before and seemed taken aback by them. When the song ended, she turned to Dave and said angrily, "How could I possibly sing over that? It's so loud." I assumed that was what they wanted, and I just went for it. I knew my strength was going to be that song and not the other weird ones, so I played what I thought worked. If they didn't like it, there was nothing I could do about it now. After the audition, Orr told me I did great, but it was really Dave's decision. He said they would get back to me by the latest tomorrow afternoon. The next day, I was in jury duty in downtown Brooklyn. It was a miserable day of just waiting around for hours. Orr called me mid-afternoon and left a message to call him back. As soon as I had a break, I called him to find out my fate. To tell you the truth, I wasn't even sure that I wanted the gig, but I knew I had to start taking chances on new things and seizing the moment. Orr told me that I did great, but Dave didn't really want live drums in the show. For a moment, I really wasn't sure if I was disappointed or not. Before I could figure it out in my head, Orr yelled, "Just kidding, dude. You got the gig." My feelings were clear this time. I was extremely excited to begin a new chapter in my musical career with Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. Orr asked me if I could make it back to the tent later that night to see the show and get a feel for it. It was their second preview show. A play or a musical has a series of preview shows before the real opening night, so that the cast and crew can work out all of the bugs before they lock things into place. Once a show officially opens, it can't be changed. I told Orr, sure, I'll be there. Everything was happening so fast. Once I arrived at the tent later that night, someone ushered me into the wardrobe department so I could get fitted for my costume. Crazy. I still had no idea what the show even was, and I was getting fitted for my costume. After watching the show for the first time, I still didn't understand exactly what was going on. I knew that it was very different from anything that I had ever heard, and definitely anything that I've ever played before. Orr wanted me to come back the next day and play a few more songs in rehearsal with the whole band and cast. When I arrived the next day, we played through a few songs that I had already worked on, and then we tried a couple of new ones. I had new sheet music on my stand, but I hadn't sight read in a very long time. We played through a wild, upbeat song called Balaga, which I'd never even heard except for once the night before. I tried my best to follow along with the sheet music. We stumbled through it and continued on. After another hour or so, Orr and Dave asked me if I thought I could be ready to sit in on a few songs that night. I was very taken aback by this and didn't want it to seem like I didn't want to play, so I said, sure. I assumed they only wanted me to play the original 3 songs they sent me, but they had something else in mind. They gave me a recording and the sheet music, mostly just what the track was playing, and asked me to try to learn and come up with parts for 5 other songs. I was a little overwhelmed, but up for the challenge. I took the recording and the sheet music and sat in the park for the next 3 hours, trying to absorb as much as I possibly could. I didn't even have access to a drum set to rehearse on, so I just tried to memorize what I could. On the night of May 18th, 2013, I played my first show with Natasha Pierre and the Great Comet of 1812. Backstage at the tent, everyone had their own little dressing area. Mine now had my name tag on it with my costume waiting for me. I wasn't set to play on the opening song, Prologue, but would enter shortly after. As I sat at my station, I experienced a different kind of frozen moment, unlike others I had before. All things up until this point were focused on excitement, accomplishment, and love, while this one had a slightly different feel to it. As I sat there and stared into my mirror, I could hear the opening applause for the show coming from 10 feet behind me through a red velour curtain. I knew this moment marked a change in my life. I could feel a big opportunity in front of me. Orr told me that the ultimate goal of the show was to get it to Broadway. I knew as soon as I walked through that curtain that I was taking my first steps to the Great White Way. I stared at myself in the mirror during that frozen moment and told myself, go get it. My first show was definitely very rocky. Not only did I not know the material as well as I would have liked, but the whole atmosphere inside of the tent was foreign to me. It took a while for me to adjust the right dynamics to use during each song, since this gig definitely did not require me to bang away like I'd been accustomed to while playing with ZO2 in front of 20,000 people. This was more about control and creating a mood. By the end of that very first weekend, I was much more comfortable and confident. Let the summer of 2013 begin.